So you're in marketing, I'm in marketing. Customers and prospects don't want to hear from you and me. The bigger the stakes, the bigger the typical deal size, the more they want to hear from the experts. The experts in what the company does or makes or sells. That's who they want to hear from in webinars. Problem though, those experts don't want to do webinars, those experts aren't very good at them, and those experts have legitimate fears about doing them. So you have a gap problem. The people the world wants to hear from are the same people who are the least interested in talking to strangers and the least interesting for strangers to spend 45 minutes listening to. Performance-wise, delivery-wise, not content-wise. The content isn't so much of an issue. But we've all been on webinars with an expert as the presenter, and we realize we would have been just as well off reading it in an email or reading a white paper. Those technical presenters, or expert presenters, don't know how to cross the chasm, the gap between being someone who lives with and knows the content and being someone who's great at communicating that to a live audience that they can't see, can't get useful feedback from, and don't know how to engage for 45 minutes. I'm going to assume, since you're in marketing, that you're a little more comfortable with audiences. So you're standing on the other side of that gap, alongside the audience. That's nice for you, problem solved. Except you don't know how to fill in the gap for the expert speaker so they can walk across and be with the audience too. And no amount of reading articles like how to create a webinar in 10 easy steps will help with this, because everyone's talking across the chasm from their own perspective. Everybody's stuck on the side they naturally landed on. I'm Dean Way. I'm a webinar ghostwriter, copywriter, marketer, before that, software developer and technical project manager and engineering manager, former pre-sales engineer and B2B enterprise sales rep. I also spent several years writing for professional speakers and trainers around the US and Canada. I have been that technical expert. I've been the person who had to create the presentation, and the reasons I used to hate it are the same reasons your experts hate it today. If you're having a hard time getting people on the engineering or product or technical or manufacturing side of the business to create and deliver webinars with you, you're in the right place. We're going to dig into why they resist you, why they never seem to improve if you do get them to volunteer, why they can't improve without special kinds of assistance from you, and what's possible if you provide them with what they need to cross the chasm and get to the same side that you and your audience are on. So how did we get here? Some companies decide they're going to win at webinars. It's an excellent decision. Webinars work. That debate's been settled. In the marketing world, even with the rise of social, the two powerhouse tools for persuading B2B customers and moving them to the next step in your process, whatever your process is, those two powerful tools are still email and webinars. Even mediocre webinars help a business or association advance. But even though nothing beats email and webinars, and they're the oldest digital marketing tools we have, they are radically different marketing experiences. Because in B2B, we can test and track email. We can split test, we can target, we can micro-target. We know within moments the statistics for each campaign, like the open rate, the bounce rate, click-through rate. We don't just know the percentage of unsubs, but also the exact number of them and even which individuals unsubscribed. Email is a direct marketing tool. Webinars are brand marketing tools, like ads on TV or radio. And in a minute, I'm going to surprise you by pointing out something you knew all along but didn't realize that you knew it. With webinars, we don't have the same kind of, well, we have some statistics like the registration number, the percentage of people who showed up versus watches the replay versus never watched at all. And we know if they dropped off during the webinar. But we can't tie their experience with the webinar to their behavior with us generally or their behavior with us specifically. Email is direct marketing. Webinars are brand marketing. So how do we get ourselves into a situation where audiences are as bored as ever and our technical experts resist participation? In the first webinar in this series where I talked about audience attention, I mentioned that B2C webinars aren't easier to produce than B2B ones, but you get a lot more data and feedback because those webinars are often geared around selling something inside the webinar, or at least they have a clear call to action. People who create B2C webinars can review and iterate and dial in their messaging because they made a sale, or they didn't. They converted 5% of the audience into buyers. They want to get to 6% and 10, 20. Not many B2B marketing departments advertise on TV or radio. Like almost all marketing departments these days, your headcount is very direct marketing heavy, the tactical side, not the creative side. And when I say creative, you know I'm not saying that direct marketing isn't creative. It's very creative. I'm using the term creative in the marketing personnel sense. People paid to dream up ways and messaging so that prospects feel closer and respond emotionally to your company, not to an offer or to a specific transaction. Messaging that changes their perspective, not just to interrupt them. You need all kinds of people, but no CMO or VP of marketing watching this today is going to tell me their headcount isn't heavily weighted on the direct side. For most B2B organizations, there just isn't much of a reason to employ many people on the creative side. Agencies, by the way, look the same way you do these days. So it's not just internal marketing departments that have shifted over the past 20 years into being direct heavy. Over the past couple of decades, marketing departments have become more heavily weighted on the direct marketing side. And generally, that's a good thing. But webinars are brand marketing. To make better webinars, CMOs turn to people who had the right kind of on-air personality to present or host at webinars. And marketing departments turn to gimmicks and band-aids like instant polls, which is exactly what you'd expect a direct marketing department to ask for, right? Because what's a poll or any kind of pop-up device other than another way to interrupt people to get their attention? I create email marketing campaigns. I do social media advertising. I interrupt in those fields. I'm not accusing anyone of anything. But let's admit that if direct marketing stuff worked in webinars, if tactical stuff like that worked in webinars, you'd be killing it right now. You've got direct marketing down to a science. But B2B webinars, which is pretty much every webinar you're doing if you're watching this, B2B webinars are brand marketing. And interruptions, pop-ups, hard stops during the narrative flow, they don't play well in B2B webinars. I could make a whole other webinar just about the many reasons that those kinds of tactics don't work in this specific context. Everything from the high percentage of people who aren't looking at the screen to the way you don't have a structure in place to get and keep and lure back audience attention from an audience that's seen hundreds or thousands of webinars and online presentations and have been trained to not pay attention. You're not going to overcome 20 plus years of jaded audience self-training with a pop-up survey. Can you get and keep and lure back audience attention in B2B webinars? Yes. Can you move an audience to perform your call to action? Absolutely. Can you do it the same way it's done in direct marketing? No. And you must know that by now. You see the results or the lack of results, webinar after webinar. Now, all this explanation and brand marketing and direct marketing, on-air personalities, not knowing how to get the audience's attention up front, keep it, lure back if they get distracted, getting them to treat your call to action like it's the logical step to do at the end of your webinar, and the response to all that being interruption tactics. Deep breath. All of those gets us back to why experts and technical presenters in your company resist doing webinars. They don't think of themselves in the terms you and I think, but they're on the brand marketing side of this equation. They're not the kind of people who are fine with interrupting strangers that weren't even paying attention to them. They think your pop-up surveys are stupid. They aren't even conscious of why they think pop-up interruptions are stupid. They just know that they are. They know that they hate them, so it makes sense everyone else would too. They also know that they are not or won't enjoy pretending to be a sparkling on-air personality, which is the only other way CMOs try to make webinars better and more engaging. Just the opposite, actually. A lot of tech presenters will tighten up their delivery, as in move to a steady monotone or be strict about their content in the wrong way because boring feels safe. They also default into a sort of college lecture mode where they think the purpose of the webinar is to educate the audience as much as possible. Now, the core purpose of any business webinar is to make the audience member feel safe as your company moves closer to their company. And jamming lots of information into the webinar sounds like one way to do that, but it doesn't work because the audience gets bored and stops paying attention. And we established in the last session that if the audience isn't paying attention, we've wasted the work we put into making the webinar. Educating the audience isn't the goal of your webinar. It's just a side effect. Just like getting them to believe that you can solve their problem isn't the goal of the webinar either. It's also just a side effect. The goal is to make them feel safe so they take the next step with you. Anything that works against that goal means you've wasted the effort you put into the webinar. That goes for the other approach some technical presenters take too, to make their presentation delivery sound more natural, more human. This is when your presenter might try to say something clever or self-deprecating or add jokes that don't land and leave everyone feeling awkward. Any of this sound familiar? None of those make the audience feel safer letting your company get closer to theirs, especially self-deprecating comments that aren't carefully contextualized. This is a different concept, by the way, called costly signaling that I cover in the third and final session of this series. If your competitors are bigger than you or have a strength that you want to negate, costly signaling is one tool for doing that in a webinar. On top of all that, creating a technical or expert content type of webinar is a ton of work for the person you're asking to do it. It's not their actual job. They can't see forward and envision success because it's not likely to be a success, unless we consider boring or mediocre webinars to be successes. The whole webinar thing, for them, is sort of a no-win proposition. So they're on one side of the chasm, and you're on the other side, next to the audience, with no bridge in between. The bridge exists, though. It's a combination of a structure that they can see and appreciate with a history and record of success that makes sense to them. That's the first part. The second part is help with writing a script in their voice that's suited for listeners, which is what most webinar audiences are most of the time. It doesn't mean they aren't paying attention. It just means they're not looking at the screen every second. In fairness to them, you're not putting 45 minutes of visually engaging content on screen anyway. So why would you expect them to stare at the screen continuously? You don't do that when you're in the audience. And the third part of something you understand really well when it comes to speaking to an audience, rehearsal. Because as a marketer, it's disheartening when your expert says the slides are ready and they're ready for a rehearsal, except they don't call it a rehearsal, do they? They call it a walkthrough, because that's what it is. You'd love to pretend to be the audience and have them present or deliver their talk. But instead, they fire up slide 3 and they say, on this slide, I'm going to talk to them about X and maybe Y. Slide 4, on this slide, I'm going to talk about A and B. And not good enough in a world where we've pretty much maxed out our effectiveness in direct marketing, and companies are looking at webinars as the next big area for study and improvement. The global lockdown really drove home the importance of getting good at this. And really, how are we not fantastic at something we've been working at for over 20 years? It's baffling, right? I didn't know back then the hundreds of little things I do now about making good webinars, but everything I do today would have worked just fine back then. That's why it's so easy to adopt right now. Here's how I help expert and technical people construct a great audience-engaging webinar. And remember, I used to be one of these folks. You should steal this from me. First up, the structure. Here's the general structure. I showed it in the last session. This gets anyone doing a technical or expert-based webinar from a mediocre one to a decent one. After 1,000 or more webinars, sales presentations, and keynote speeches, and lots of experiments, lots of failures, all in B2B, the structure I recommend today is this one plus a 10-question format woven into the script that comes, ironically, from direct marketing, the original direct marketing, direct mail, long-form sales letters, still used today, adapted already to other media, including formats like infomercials, which we cannot use in B2B or will drive away our audience. But infomercials aside, this format, adapted by me for us, works. And every time I show it to a technical expert and explain that it's worked for over 100 years, they get it. They've even experienced it as a consumer. The version I use, like I said, had to be adapted for B2B because in B2B, we're expected to do certain things in B2B and we're expected to never do other things that B2C webinar ghostwriters use all the time. But like I said, lots of experiments, lots of failures to get to this point. Here are those questions in order because the order is half the power in them. The order is what a lot of the experimentation was about, to dial it in. The order is different for B2C, by the way. So if you also do B2C webinars, don't follow this pattern. It'll work, but the B2C ordering is better suited to conversions over in that field. So here are the 10 questions for B2B presentations, including the bonus or core question, which I'll talk about first. And those questions layer right on top of the structure I showed you last time. Everything I do fits together. But let's stop thinking about audience attention for a minute and slides and even your technical presenter, along with all the problems we have with that whole situation. Instead, think about this. What's the point of a webinar? I mean, at the rock bottom core of the whole frigging thing, what is the point of any B2B webinar? If you do nothing else, and this is why we've all managed to get by, barely, with mediocre webinars up to this point, even most of our crappiest webinars have managed to convey, at least a little bit, it's safe for you as an employee with a career to think about, with the respect of your peers and the respect of your boss and leadership and the board and whoever. With all that on the line, it's safe for you to let my company move closer to your company. So the bonus B2B question, the one our monkey brains have been answering for your audiences, even if they didn't realize it, the question the audience unconsciously asks themselves is, how do I know I won't be blamed for letting you move closer to my employer? In the last session, I said that if you internalized that webinars are really an audio experience with some visuals, that if you accepted the fact that you're in the radio business, not TV, you could stop watching and still be ahead of where you were before. Remember that? This is that sort of revelation for this session. If you internalize and double down and triple down on letting your audience know, without explicitly saying it, that if they let your company move closer to their company, they're still going to be safe, that's a game changer. How do we tell them without saying that? That's where the concepts like inform with the text, persuade with the subtext come in. You do it by answering these questions in this order without ever explicitly showing the questions. Okay, time for the reveal. In B2B webinars, the questions that your audience want you to answer, even if they aren't conscious of it, are, in order, why is this different? How do I know I can trust you? How do I know this is real? What's in it for us? What's kept us from getting what we want? How will this help us get what we want? Why now, which is the hardest question to answer in all of B2B because there is no scarcity of any kind in B2B. How does it work? What's the risk of doing nothing? And what's the next step? I am not going to spend any time explaining in detail any of these questions. Instead, I have a set of short videos that do that, and people at almost 400 companies, over 400 companies actually in the last few weeks, have enrolled in my courses to watch those videos and a module about audience attention and a module about structure. I'll send you a link to all that. It's all free, and you or someone on your team can watch the whole course in about 3 hours. It'll change everything about how you create webinars. Now, back to our technical presenter. They don't know how to structure a webinar presentation to get and keep audience attention. So you give them the structure I gave you last time. They don't know the underlying fear the audience has that keeps them from acting on your call to action. Give them the questions I just gave you. That stuff has been proven out, iterated through, and vetted. It works, and it's designed to let people who aren't professional speakers with sparkling on-air personalities do a damn fine job anyway. Next, explain that webinars are 90% audio, so spending all of their time on the visual 10% of the webinar, in other words, their slides, and ignoring the critical 90%, what they say and how they say it, makes no sense. You don't start creating a webinar in PowerPoint. You start in Word. Paste those 10 questions into Word and start talking to your audience by answering those questions for them. Answer all of them. Nothing can be skipped. That structure, by the way, with those questions is so flexible, you can create any kind of presentation using them. When it comes to slides, ideally, you give them a template so they can drop in content based on their script. This isn't a graphical template, though feel free to make it look like your approved corporate theme. This is a structural template that helps ensure audience attention. Basically, make a template from the structure that I gave you. Explain your structural template to your presenter. Remember, there's a lot of fear underlying the resistance you're getting. The more your presenter understands what the template does, the better your end result. After structure, audience attention concepts. If you can, get your presenter to watch the same videos I'm sending you. And finally, the most important part of the whole thing, the script. And yeah, I know, everyone starts off thinking a script is a lot of work. It adds work, and your presenter will sound like they're reading a textbook to the audience. Wrong, wrong, and very much wrong. First, they're already writing a script. They're just keeping it in the two worst possible places, in their head and written out on their slides. By the way, it sounds a lot better to them in their head than it does when they say it out loud. That's true for everybody. Second, most of the time spent editing the script is going to be shifted from time spent creating slides, which is where they waste most of their time today anyway. So we take time away from slide creation and give it to script writing. And it won't sound like they're reading from a textbook, because it's going to be written at a 4th grade reading level using easy to use and free tools. One thing to keep an eye on, presenters and CMOs who switch to writing a script first instead of wasting time with slides first, report back to me that something interesting happens to them. Their webinars get shorter. Same amount of content, same presenter, same everything, but where before they needed 45 or 50 minutes and still felt like they were rushing and squeezed the Q&A session, now they're done in about 30 minutes. I don't want you to be surprised, so here's why that happens. When you work off of a script, your final product, which is a performed and delivered presentation, has all of the wasted time driven out of it. All of the futzing around, all of the useless repetition, all of the awkward silences and pauses to say something you should have said on the previous slide but you forgot. All the human doing an improv stuff that taxes the audience's attention, all that is driven out during the script editing. Your webinar will also tighten up because the presenter, as they work on their script, they're practicing their lines over and over automatically. They're building muscle memory for their main points and their favorite lines, all of it. So the presenter sounds more relaxed, more polished. And driving the reading level down to grade 4 or 5 means the sentences are shorter and they're harder to trip over. You don't sound like you're reading a textbook. And the audience's opinion of the presenter, and I've seen this happen with absolute consistency, their opinion of the presenter goes up because this person clearly has a deep understanding of the material since they're communicating complex information in simple, clear, declarative sentences. Your expert ends up with 2 new skills, writing a script and structuring a PowerPoint. And they'll use that for the rest of their career. They're more confident because every word is already written and it sounds good when they read it. And the combination of all of that translates into a successful webinar where they can safely present and deliver and showcase what they know. Now, agreeing to do your webinar isn't a no-win for them anymore. It's a win-win-win for them because you've helped them preempt all the risks and fears with proven structures and tools. And as far as scripts go, if you want to get started right away doing this, here's the 1-minute express version of the process. Use the structure and questions I gave you to have them or help them write a very rough script or even just bullet points answering the questions and the simplest possible slides. Don't even fix the typos. Have your presenter give the presentation, but alone, recording into their phone. Just audio. Then they give you the audio file and you send it to rev.com and pay to have it transcribed by a human. It'll cost about $1.50 per minute. Give that text file back to your presenter and have them paste it into Grammarly to clean up the sentences. Then copy and paste that version into HemingwayApp.com. Rewrite all the sentences that get flagged in red and anything in yellow that the presenter isn't 1,000% sure they won't trip over when they read it out loud. Keep editing until the grade level gets down to level 4, maybe 5. The fastest way to lower the grade level, by the way, is to break up sentences into short ones with a single thought in each. Basically, you're taking out commas and replacing them with periods. Here's the trick to this. The script, after it's been broken up into short sentences in Hemingway, it won't look impressive to someone who's reading it. Too many short sentences, other stuff, it'll just look weird. But it'll sound great to a listener. They can't see the script. All they know is that this stream of audible data coming at them is understandable and clear and moves along at a nice pace. There's a longer explanation for this whole process, but not much longer because I've shown lots of people how to do this pretty quickly, and a video on using HemingwayApp.com in the video series I'm sending you. Okay, let's wrap this up. Now, I'm not your boss. You don't have to do any of the things I've talked about, but more people are discovering and rediscovering webinars. Interest in new methods has never been higher, thanks to the lockdown, and you don't want your schlubby webinars being compared to interesting, entertaining, impressive webinars from your competitors. Plus, all of the next steps for leveling up are free and easy to learn. All you have to do is wait a few hours and it'll show up in your inbox or your spam folder, depending on how aggressive your email service is. Get all of those links for all of those free resources, plus the PDF booklet of the script that I use, by going to cmowebinars.com and clicking on the free stuff link on the top of the page. The next session, the third and final one, is about building a path to your webinar's call to action, because you didn't do all this work just to end up with nothing, right? We want an email sign up or a discovery call or something to help us move folks along in your sales process. So don't miss that one. We're finally at the part where everything pays off for you. I'll see you there.